Good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Suter. I'm the Director of Membership and Business Relations for the Chamber of St. Matthews, and I want to welcome you to the first of a six-part series for our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. I want to take a couple of minutes to introduce our sponsors this morning, and I want to start with Independence Bank and welcome Brad, who's the Vice President of Commercial Lending, to say a few words.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, Independence Bank is very grateful for the way the St. Matthews community has embraced us since we opened our doors 2 years ago. While Independence Bank has had a long history and is the fifth largest bank headquartered in Kentucky, our story is new to the Louisville community. Today is the first in a series of panel discussions that will focus on these important topics of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We are a proud partner of the St. Matthews Chamber on this series, and we look forward to bringing these important topics that we need to learn and bring attention to, not only in our companies, but more importantly, our communities to help us grow. Thank you again, and a special thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate that. I'd also like to thank our supporting sponsor, Leadership Louisville Center, our bronze sponsors, MMN Consulting LLC, and the Free Code Exchange and Brokers Unlimited, Inc., our community sponsors, Webster University and Randy Frank Consulting. And with that, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what to expect this morning. So we're going to have each presenter here in a few minutes introduce themselves, and then they will have a moderated discussion. During this discussion, if you have any questions, please drop those in the Q&A box, and we will get to those towards the end of the program. And now I'm going to hand this program off to your moderator, my friend, Christy Smallwood with Eagle Eye Strategies. Christy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate this opportunity very much to get to know our panelists as well as learn a lot more about these truly important topics that we'll be discussing throughout this series. And so let's just get right to it. I first things first, I would love for each of you to introduce yourselves, give us just a brief little background, and then we can kind of go from there. So I know we have Tawana Bain with T. Bain and Company. We have Keisha Deonarine with Park Community Credit Union's Nspire program. And then we also have Dr. Lewis Brogdon with Simmons College. Thank you guys so much for being here. So Keisha, why don't you go first on introduction?
Well, Christy, first of all, thank you for saying my last name correctly, because no one does. Thanks for that. And yeah, so Park Community Credit Union, I'm the Executive Director of Philanthropy and Corporate Relations. And so I work on the way that we look at philanthropy and social investment alongside Park CDFI. And as a joint endeavor, Nspire is Park's sister organization and philanthropic arm, and I'm the executive director of that. So I really work with a separate board and look at the ways that we can have impact around capital deployment across the state. And on my free time, when I have little, but when I have free time, I am actually a junior consultant with the Racial Healing Project, which is an anti-racism organization that does education and understandings of different projects and programs across the U.S. And I'm going to, I was going to say, I'll turn it to Tawana.
Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Tawana Bain. I'm the CEO of T. Bain & Co. We are a portfolio organization that spans across fashion, media, entertainment, events, and hospitality. And my claim to fame as it relates to the conversation around diversity is launching the Derby Diversity and Business Summit, which is a week-long business and community conference where we have some tough conversations to learn one another better, but our ultimate objective is to drive unity and make an economic impact. So excited to be here and share things that I've heard, words of wisdom, and also to learn from the panelists today as well.
Good morning, friends. I'm so glad to be with you. My name is Dr. Lewis Brogdon. I am the Department Chair of Religious Studies at Simmons College of Kentucky, as well as the Research Professor of Preaching and Black Church Studies at the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. I've been in ministry about 29 years and have been in the academy for a good decade. Have written 7 books, over 25 magazine journal articles, love writing. I'm blessed to do a lot of consulting for denominations, even people in politics. I have my own column in Black Politics Today magazine, and just love being on the front lines of dealing with issues of race and racism, diversity and inclusion. And I'm so thankful that in 2021, we're having conversations we need to have so that we can create some real change. So I'm glad to be with you today.
Well, again, thank you to all of our panelists today. And Tawana, you actually spoke at our Nspire program in 2020. And there was a word that you had brought up, a phrase about being an ally. And so this first session that we're having is kind of inspired from that part of the conversation that we had with you last year in developing proactive alliances within our community. And so, Dr. Brogdon, I already talked with the ladies in a promo video about this first question. So I'm going to give this first question to you. What does it mean to be an ally? What does being an ally mean? What is this?
Yeah, well, before I became a scholar, I used to be a basketball player. So I want to use a sports analogy. And to be an ally means is to not be on the sidelines, and definitely not to be in the stands, but to be in the game. So when you're dealing with issues of exclusion, issues of racial injustice, what it means to be an ally is that you get involved. And what I mean by getting involved, you're getting involved to address, to dismantle, to correct injustices. And so that's why we need allies, because that's what we're trying to do. People are experiencing disenfranchisement, marginalization, and oppression. And sometimes they don't have voice, they don't have access to power, they don't have their hands on the mechanisms that can create change. But there are people who do have access to those things, and they have their hands on those levers. And we need to connect with those people so that we can correct and address some of these things. And so ally work is probably as important in this country right now as helping people to understand that when we're talking about oppression, we're not talking about people being individually prejudiced. We're talking about systems and how systems impact masses of people, particularly people of color. So get in the game. That's what it means to be an ally.
I mean, really, there's that poem or whatever. It's like, get in the arena. Like, don't sit on the sidelines, but get in the arena, get in this game of life, if you will. But I love that analogy. Ladies, you both had great insights in our promo videos. Would you mind to share those again here in that same question to you?
You know, one of the things I'd like to piggyback off of what he just shared, you know, when we train for things, we don't train with the intent to sit on the bench. So often, you know, there are training programs, HR conferences, and we go to these and we hear it and we recognize that diversity is important. And then it's time to perform. And it seems as though all that training goes out the window and people are comfortable with sitting on the bench, except for in any other instance. So I do think that it is extremely important to understand that you're not training, you're not learning, you're not listening in on, you know, 100 different virtual panels, you know, during COVID to understand what's happening to remain on the bench. Being an ally absolutely means that you are taking what you're learning and you are putting it to work. And it also means that you are okay with, if you have been in training, that you don't need to receive all the recognition and accolades for being willing to get in the game. You know, when a team wins, the team wins, not an individual. You know, and so often, unfortunately, allies get confused with getting to the root cause of the problem with being the MVP. And we're not looking for MVPs, we're looking to solve the problem.
Good point.
I love that. And I actually, for all of those watching the webinar live or even as the replay, don't be afraid to write down your star thoughts. I call them star thoughts. We don't train with the intent to sit on the bench. That's a star thought. Like, that should be instilled into our daily lives. So Keisha, your input.
I think Tawana and Dr. Brogden bring up great points. And I'd also say that the ally and you can't just live within one side of your life. And so, for example, you have to think about it from a personal perspective and how you conduct your daily life. What are you choosing to do to support Black-owned businesses? What are you doing to reflect opportunities to continue to speak out for those who cannot speak out? But it also has to take a place in the business life as well. So what are you doing in your organization to reflect on maybe policies or board governances or hierarchies that have been put in place for years and years and years on out that don't reflect diversity and equity and inclusion? And so it is absolutely, to Tawana's point, you can't train to be on the sidelines. You have to train to be in. And so you have to own the work and own the opportunities to change the infrastructures that have been placed before us, right? So when people of color are walking into a business atmosphere, they're not walking into to historically a welcoming place or community, right? And so that's what our society, our history, our systemic racism looks like. And so we have to be advocates for the people that are coming behind us into new places of work. We also have to be supportive in our personal lives as well, because it's really important that we continue to live the walk, live the life, walk the walk on every aspect of our daily lives.
Yeah, and if I could add one quick point, just a little sort of historical context on this, and I'm saying this out of love, but to my white sisters and brothers, you have a very bad history of doing this. Your history when it comes to major issues like slavery, Jim Crow segregation, mass incarceration, is that you have people who are out there, they're bad actors and they're doing bad things. And what you have is then you have masses of white Americans who they don't galvanize and organize themselves. They don't try to be good actors to not only offset what they're doing, but to sort of dismantle these systems. And so what a lot of white Americans do is they try to be neutral. They try to, this is what Dr. King talked about, silence being complicity. So while masses of Blacks are being enslaved and you have an abolitionist movement, you have people who are trying to dismantle slavery, people trying to support slavery. And then you have masses of whites who were just kind of sitting on the sidelines saying, well, I don't want to get involved. That's political issues and things like that. And so it's a pattern in this country. And so you may be watching this video, and what I want to tell you is don't be on the wrong side of history, because when in a few more decades, when people look back on the era of mass incarceration, they're going to be people who were on the right side fighting to dismantle this system, because there are more Blacks in the criminal justice system than were under slavery. So we like to think that we're better than the folks in the 1800s, when in all actuality, we're really not. And so if you want to be an ally, you're going to be bucking that historical trend.
That is some really good points. And I will feed into your ministry side and say, don't be lukewarm would be another, don't.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to have a confession here. We're going to go a little deeper. Confession time from the white girl in the room. I don't even know what to do. Like, I would be one of those that would probably be neutral, not because I don't care, but probably because I don't even know where to begin. So what would you recommend as good action steps, or even questions to start asking myself on a daily basis to become more aware of what I need to do?
Who do you want to start?
Okay, so Christy, what I want to say is, first of all, how great is it that you're transparent enough to admit that? Because what I will tell you is most white people in the room do not want to admit their shortcomings. And I think a lot of what we see too in the work of anti-racism and racial equity is, once you own the problem, it's almost like there's this white guilt. It comes on your shoulders. And we hear a lot of that of, oh, that was many years ago. Oh, I that doesn't apply to me and my family's history. And it's not that at all. It's that we have to, as people of color, and whether it be from Black community, brown community, immigrant community, we need our white allies in the room, because you all historically have held the power to make change, right? Historically, it's not people of color that have made change in this society and in our government, legislations, policies. It's white people that have held the money, the capital, the power, decision-making efforts. And so when you say it, so first off, that's great. You admitted that you don't know what to do, because that helps other folks bring it to attention, the needs, to make sure to change community, right? So, and the second thing I would say really quickly is, I think when it comes to having ally, the first thing is looking at how you could be supportive in different governances, policies, legislation, and advocacy work, because we understand that the majority of the systemic racism that's happening in our country, mass incarceration, the Jim Crow era, redlining in housing, that's all been through government policy and truly the political hierarchy that exists within our country. So I think what the biggest thing that white allies can do is to understand how those policies and legislations help her community, and voting and power to help us re-change all of those things in order for us to have the ability to have equity. Because equity is not real right now when it comes to people of color, or specifically Black community. Traditionally, the past 400 years, the ability to build generational wealth, have housing in different communities, and just have the ability to live equity was not given to Black people. And so that's a big part of the way that we have to break the current system in order to change it.
Tawana, thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna let Dr. Brogdon go first, but I'm gonna, I'm gonna go ahead and,
You want me to jump in and then tag you?
yeah, go ahead and jump in, and then I'll.
Yeah, so the fact that I work both in the sort of educational arena as well as the religious arena, we've really had to come to grips in both of those spaces that we've really failed the citizens of this country. Because what we try to do in educational institutions with people who go to college is we try to move them beyond what I call ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is thinking that your cultural context, your sort of ethnic lens is central, is normative, and is the way you interpret everyone else's story and history and context. And so we've done a poor job of educating our white sisters and brothers out of thinking that their context is the be all end all, is the beginning and the end of everything. So this is why our educational system hasn't educated people about what has really happened in this country. So you can have members of the white community say, well, I didn't own slaves, but then they don't understand what happened after slavery. So let me give you one example. The Homestead Act. So instead of the federal government giving freed slaves 40 acres and a mule, they were giving away millions of acres to white Americans called in the Homestead Act. I mean, millions. Basically government handouts, free land that they were giving to whites, denied giving that to Blacks. And of course, you know that this was all done while also disenfranchising Native Americans. And so you can calculate the number of descendants of whites today who their lineage of home ownership and wealth creation can be traced to a racist policy from the federal government. And so that's why it's such irony that you hear white Americans talking about Black people wanting handouts. And I tell them, you all got handouts. The federal government gave you things. So whether it's the Homestead Act, whether it's GI Bill, whether it's the New Deal, I mean, so it's beside the point. You may not have owned slaves, but white Americans have been enfranchised and giving a head start and a leg up in so many different ways. So if you're gonna be an ally, here's what you have to understand is that you got a lot of homework to do. You're gonna have to study some history. You're gonna have to study it from the perspective of other people. And just be willing for a moment to sort of suspend judgment and to think that the way you've been taught history is all there is to the sort of historical narrative. And if you're willing to do some homework and to start reading some books and to move beyond ethnocentrism and to understand that we all share this country, we all have different histories and different experiences. And if we can just take some time to listen to each other, learn from each other, then we can have a more complex, richer understanding of our history that really helps us to make sense of why we are where we are today. And that becomes the basis upon which we then say, how do we work together so that we can build a different future? We're trying to do that while trying to ignore what has really happened. And that's why it gets us nowhere. So if you want to be an ally, you got some homework to do, because we got to move you beyond ethnocentrism, which is why religious institutions are important, because educational institutions can supply the what. But we need our religious institutions to really nurture and cultivate in us the deeper whys, the deeper motivations for why we should do that. You know, things like loving your neighbor. That's why we need to learn about other people's history, so that we can be the Good Samaritan in the Good Samaritan story, and not be those who are looking and getting on the other side of the road and walking away. So you get in the game, you do the right thing. Learning history is what really helps you to be a good ally. You're it, Tawana.
Yeah. So, and I want to add, not only doing your homework, but just being honest. You know, sometimes, you know, the way I like to put it is keeping it real with yourself first. I may have shared this when I spoke with you all last, Christy, but I had a girls outing, if you will, with some girlfriends, and we were watching a movie. And one of my girlfriends went on to say, you know, my family didn't own slaves. My family doesn't see color. My family, never subscribed to those ideals. So I don't understand why I'm being held accountable for things that I didn't know that existed. And, I really just wanted to go home. I came to watch a movie. I did not come to have the DE&I conversation with my girlfriends, but I recognize that allowing her to live in this bubble, to Dr. Brogdon's point, we're not doing you any justice by allowing you to continue that narrative. And so I've asked her, let's just be honest for a second. Your family may not have owned slaves, and your family may not be racist, but I guarantee you that if the police showed up at your door on a Monday morning and told you that you needed to spend the rest of your life Black, you wouldn't want it. You wouldn't want it. Why? There's a lot of things that people will show up on your doorstep and say, hey, you're going to get to have this for the rest of your life: money, food, transportation. And you'd say, sign me up. But if they said to you, you need to spend the rest of your life in Black skin, you wouldn't want it, because subconsciously you understand that it's not popular, it's not cool in society to be Black. So if you don't want it for your Black and brown brothers and sisters whom you say you love and whom you say you'll show up and support, imagine them not being able to take it off. And so if you recognize that you don't want it, what will it take to get to a place in our country where someone showed up on your doorstep and told you that you must spend the rest of your life in brown or Black skin, and you don't flinch? You actually get excited about the new opportunity that's being afforded to you. And so being honest is most certainly the first part. Being honest in knowing that, being Black or brown comes with a negative connotation. And I know that subconsciously. Even though I know it's wrong, what am I doing so that they're not living a life that I don't want? And then the second part I'd like to add on to his point, sometimes because there have been things that are unfair things need to take place in order to correct them. So let's use the children in the playroom. And you notice that the other children have been unfairly taking toys from one child, and so they didn't get to spend their recess really enjoying it. The type of teacher that I am, I might say, you know what, everybody, since you all took all the toys from Tawana and would not have let Tawana play, I'm going to allow Tawana an extra 30 minutes, but all of you are going to go back into the classroom. And why is that important? If we know that historically our country has taken things from people, who's willing to stand up and give some things unfairly? Because there are a set of people that are behind generationally because of unfair things that have happened in the past. Yes, give her that board seat, give him that board seat. Yes, hire this person into this position. Yes, give this organization the funding that it needs. Yes, cut this budget over here and invest over here. If you're in this to truly get to the root of the problem. And that is the disparity from an equity perspective, where one class of people, one race of people has not benefited because some of our forefounders didn't understand the ramifications of capitalism down the road for what they were trying to accomplish. And so I ask people all the time, why are you in this work? Are you in this work because right now you recognize that it's popular to talk about equity and diversity? Or are you in this work because you want to solve a problem? Because anything else that we do in this country, when there is a problem, whether it's a financial problem, a health problem, we get to the root cause. A doctor doesn't say, I understand that you have an issue with your liver, but I want to work on your heart. We have an issue in this country where Black people are at the bottom of the social economic ladder. And if I take that further, Black women. So what are you doing in your work to promote, invest in, to get to the root cause, not to favor them, right? Are you here to solve the problem, or are you here for the accolades that come along with it? And if you're here to solve the problem, you will make intentional investments in promotion and opportunities for those that are at the bottom, even if you don't receive recognition for it. And I think that's where we get caught up in saying we want to help, as long as there's an award, there's a shout out, our face or our name is plastered on a poster. And if that's the reason that you're in this work, you're not going to get to the root of the problem. And I'm here to solve the problem.
And can I add to Tawana? I think she brings up a good point. Often we see now DE&I is a popular subject. Whether you're in this work, whether you're consulting in this work, it's now become a popularity. It's what can the organization do to check a box? And I think DE&I is so before an organization, no matter what company you're with, can get to DE&I, that inclusivity, that welcoming concept, you have to address anti-racism. You cannot do one without the other. There is a true basis of anti-racism historically, systemically. The anti-racism practices, changing the policies, to Tawana's point, also, where's your board? Where's your executives? How are you looking at diversity among all of the decision makers in your organization? That's the only way the true anti-racism shift will happen. And then you can talk about everybody being at the table. You can't have everyone at the table if the table's not built. And you also have to know who built it. That's really important, because that's how you're going to get to that inclusivity. And I think another point to bring up after Dr. Brogdon and Tawana spoke is, people constantly get confused that white privilege is something they choose to have. Well, I grew up in a socioeconomic difference. I grew up in an area that we had to worry about money. Maybe there's a poverty-induced area. That doesn't mean that white privilege doesn't exist. White privilege is the base of you being born white and having accessibility to things that traditionally Black and brown communities did not have throughout their entire existence. That's a very different conversation. It doesn't mean you live in a mansion. It doesn't mean you have more money or access than your other white brothers and sisters. What that means is you guys come with accessibility that's been afforded to you historically, that's not been afforded to others. And that's where that white privilege comes in. So I often hear, I don't have white privilege, I grew up poor. That has nothing to do with it. The difference is you have the ability to go to any college you wanted to. Your family generationally could have owned a home in a traditionally white area of town. Generational wealth was afforded to you through the banking and financial systems in this country. That was not the case with Black community. And so that's another thing to clear today is, if you're white, yes, you have white privilege. It doesn't label you as a bad person. It labels you the afforded of other accessibilities. But as an ally, that's when you have to make sure everyone else comes to the table and gets the same things you do. And that's where that system is.
And taking it, a step further, white privilege is having the privilege to wake up in a skin.
Yep.
Or not having to wake up in a skin that you can say you don't want. Right? Sometimes because I've heard that, I don't have this, or my family struggled or whatever. But the difference is you can be born to a family that's poor, or even in a certain side of town, but you can get dropped off in a whole nother neighborhood and no one knows. Okay. I don't matter where I go, they know I'm Black. Right? So you have the privilege of being able to wake up and be in a skin that if someone came to the door and said, you've got to change it, you wouldn't automatically. Because I want to tell you, myself growing up, my mother moved us out of Black, or really more of a melting pot neighborhood, into suburbia. And it was all white in that neighborhood. And I ended up growing up in white culture. And I remember all the years where I never had a complex or an issue with the skin that I was in, until I was moved into an area and went to school and recognized. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want this. I didn't have the privilege to take it off at the time when I didn't want it.
So that leads me to a really good, like the next question. We're wrapping this as a proactive alliances, and we talked about what it is to be an ally. For each of our panelists here, why is being an ally important to you specifically? Like Tawana, you've shared some of your story, Keisha, your story. You guys have shared your stories a little bit. Let's go a little deeper. Why it's so important to you?
You know, it's a lot of important. One, don't tell me that you're my friend. Don't tell me that you support me and that you love me, but you can't stand up and speak out against hate or speak out against inequities, because I'm human too. And regardless if I'm telling you at every turn the experiences that I'm having, you can't look your friend in the face. It's kind of like, you can't have a husband that says, honey, I love you, and there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you. But the moment another family member or a friend begins to attack you, they stand back on the sidelines. You're not going to feel very loved. You're not going to feel very supported. And so it's very difficult already to be in a society where you may have people that don't support you, than to also have your friends. They can laugh with you, they can, hang out with you, but the moment it comes time to protect you, they're not willing. Now, I do understand the difference between not being well equipped and not being willing. And if you feel as though you are not well equipped, we're not living in an age where you don't have access to information. Online alone, you can go to work educating yourself on how to be an ally, how to stand up, how to say things, and how to get uncomfortable. Because you will have family members and friends that will call you a snowflake in a heartbeat because you feel the need to speak up. But it goes deeper than that. Really questioning people's moral character and judgment and integrity about how they're treating someone based on the color of their skin. And so therefore, why are you in a position of authority to discuss whether or not a certain group is lazy or whether they want handouts? Because if you are the type that might disenfranchise them or create barriers for them, and you claim that, it was just a joke, or, I just feel this way about this one particular group, how many more people might be doing that in their daily lives that are preventing them from upward mobility? So really helping them understand that if you take that one person's actions and multiply it by thousands, maybe that's the reason why this particular race isn't where they need to be. And having that conversation and being honest about it. I think everything really does boil back to being honest. And if you're not willing to be honest with yourself, and if you're not willing to be honest with the people around you, don't claim to be my ally, don't claim to be my friend. As a matter of fact, go crawl under the rock and stay there, but accept that you're making that decision. I would much rather see you hiding under a rock than to be marching alongside me or claiming that you're going to show up to the march and then don't.
Ooh, I love that. Especially the piece about telling the truth. And I really think what makes it so hard for people to tell the truth is their lack of compassion for Black and brown people. And we're at a point in this country where we are experiencing a real moral crisis that every generation in America has experienced. Because just for a second, imagine what it would be like if the be all end all of your life was to be an enslaved African, an enslaved person. No one wants to be a slave, but yet people found a way to be comfortable with that system and to not show human compassion for these people. So then when slavery becomes unconstitutional and we go to the Black Code's lynching, okay, thousands of Blacks are being lynched. Lynchings are being attended by thousands upon thousands of whites. It was the equivalent of going to baseball, basketball, and football games. These were social and public spectacles. Blacks have to drink out of this water fountain, whites get to drink out. They learn how to sort of play moral gymnastics within themselves to say that that's okay. And friends, we're doing the exact same thing today. So the reason why being an ally is so important is because I care so much about the issue of human suffering. And racism produces so much suffering in our world. People who are suffering in the prison system, people who are on their jobs and they're not being treated equitably because of the color of their skin. There are companies with assets that can be traced back to the slave trade. All our Ivy League institutions. I mean, I have the full list of every college and university that owes its debt back to the era of slavery. And these are some of the wealthiest, some of the largest, some of the most prestigious institutions in this country. And they think their way of doing the right thing is having a few Black and brown folks on the faculty. Look at all the presidents, look at who continues to run the country. We have major sort of systemic problems. So we need allies because people are suffering. So when we claim Black Lives Matter, that's nothing but the latest iteration. Whether it was Black Power in the 60s, whether it was this idea of somebodyness that Dr. King was talking about during the freedom struggle, it's Black and brown people's way to claim that we matter, that man, we are suffering and we are fighting to do something about this. And so the reason we need you in the game, the reason being an ally is so important is because people are suffering. And I'm doing everything I possibly can to prevent as much suffering as possible. And so this is why we need you. And this is why this conversation is so important.
And I'd like to Dr. Brogdon's point, there's some confusion as it relates to the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Lives Matter organization that has grown exponentially. It's really important to understand the difference between the two. The Black Lives Matter movement was developed as he had suggested. We matter, and we are tired of being silent. And we are tired of watching people tell us they love us, they support us, they have our backs, be complicit. There are those, and I'm not going to say all, but there are those that have used it as a revenue generator or as a branding opportunity that have also tainted those that tried to organize and do it the right way. Yeah. So it's very important to understand you have organizations that are branding themselves as BLM, and then there are people that are just in the movement. I'm a person that's in the movement that's saying my Black life matter, my Black sons' lives matter, my Black neighbors, my mother, my aunties, they matter. And I want people to recognize the difference of what I experienced. I want to share a story. I had forgotten about this for quite some time. And I share that I forgot about it because so much stuffing happens in the Black community. And what became apparent during COVID, when you notice that Black and brown people were dying at higher rates than their white allies or peers, is because there are more conditions that exist in the Black community that are directly tied to racism. Mm-hmm. Stress manifests itself into other diseases. Just waking up in a country where you have to navigate as Black is enough stress to lead to diseases, which then lead to a shorter lifespan. I tell people all the time, I don't want to die faster than you do because there are people within your race that you're not willing to stand up to dismantle a system. And there's so much stuffing that goes on and you learn to just deal with it. I was at a Homerama show, and once the parking had run out, many people began to park on the sides of driveways or along people's homes. And I wasn't the only one. But I remember walking to my car and this young white woman comes out yelling and screaming at me. I mean, it was so traumatic that there was a crowd of people that began to gather. And this crowd of people were like, oh, it's getting ready to go down. And I recognized they were expecting me to haul off and attack this woman for attacking me. What so many people failed to realize, except for my girlfriends who came dashing down the street, was that I was afraid. And as I began to say, I'm sorry, I'm choking up in tears because 1, I'm afraid. And 2, I am so hurt that you couldn't say, ma'am, can you please move your car off of my lawn? She was shocked. Her family, everybody was so confused that my response was fear and tears. And so I recognized that you were expecting some other sort of behavior from me. And my girlfriends, white girls, were so confused as to, I don't understand what just happened. And so often I'm explaining, this is what I deal with. This is what I stuff. And so it's important in really understanding, you know, I was sharing with someone the other day, this guy was so upset when my significant other, a white man, called him racist. And I'm still educating him on the realities of our country. He decided he wanted to go on vacation. I'm used to being in a room where I could be the only Black person. I've become used to it. It's not a phenomenon for me anymore. And so we walk into this restaurant. We were invited by his chief of staff, whom was invited by the groom and his wife. And when I walked in, and he and I were asked to grab a drink at the bar that they had purchased, bought out the place, I sat down, my significant other sits down beside me, and the bartender says to me, ma'am, I'm really sorry, but this is a private event. My first immediate reaction wasn't that this guy was being racist. My first reaction was, I understand that. I have been invited. And he looked at me again and he says, no, really, like I could get in a lot of trouble for serving you. This is a private event. And so suddenly, and this was in August of 2020. Now, if that doesn't make you wonder what the hell, we are having protests erupt around our country saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives belong. And he looked at me and he says, I could really get in trouble. And I sat there puzzled. And I said to him again, and my significant other said again, she was invited. So the guy leaves and I'm thinking that he's going to go and ask the owner, which at this point, I don't care if you ask the owner or the host of the event, but instead I get a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and it's now the manager. Ma'am, this is a private event and you must leave. No one ever said, we're going to check with the host. No one ever asked my significant other. No one asked his chief of staff. Once again, because I'm a very emotional person and the tears start falling. I cannot believe that it is 2020 in the middle of what we have going on. So my significant other, who again, sometimes thinks that I'm being overly sensitive about things, is so furious that he says, this is so racist. But you want to know what's interesting? The young man and the manager were infuriated. How dare you? How dare you say that what I'm saying is racist? What the young man and his manager failed to understand, that had you met me in a supermarket where there were more Black people and brown people around, and I would have said, excuse me, sir, can you pass me that magazine? He would have said, no problem. But the problem was we were in an elite establishment. He was not used to seeing Black people there. So subconsciously, he felt that I didn't belong. That is the system that we're trying to fix.
Okay,
But
so
any given day,
thanks, Tawana, for getting me super riled up for that. So
That was great.
I'm no, I have no words for that because I'm way too redneck and I would have popped off somebody really fast for that one.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
my other half wanted to, but the moral of the story here is this. People get so upset when you say what you just did was racist, and they confuse that with you are a racist. No. Like I said, the man would have had no problem with me in a setting where he felt I belonged. But what he did in that moment was racist. And so you have to check when you do racist things, just like men in our family can do chauvinistic things. And they say, Dad, like, why would you say that? Or Unc? And they're like, oh man, yeah, you're right. Get to the point.
That's a whole other panel session. That is a whole other series.
Like if you want to be a real ally, get to the point where you're checking yourself and say, damn, I did some racist stuff today. I mean, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Keisha, something important to you, and then I want to make sure that we get to some questions that we've had from attendees here. So I know, and I also know I want to be respectful. Keisha, you're going to have to pop off here real quick because I know you've got another thing looming out there. So input for you.
Well, I think so. The importance of being an ally, so it comes from a different context, but it definitely lays within the same things that Dr. Brogdon and Tawana are saying in the sense of how you grow up and what your expectations are. So we are immigrants to this country, very proud immigrant. My parents came to America in the 1980s. They stayed here for 2 years. At the time, you couldn't bring your whole family. You had to apply for what they call visas. And so then my sister and I stayed back in our country in Trinidad. So we are West Indian descent. So if you all are not familiar with that, West Indian descent is Caribbean descent. So it's a lot of Black, Indian, and Latinx communities combined within the islands, so the Caribbean islands. And so all of that is actually based on colonialization, how they were owned by the British and they were owned by the Spaniards and they then colonized. And so there's a lot of racist context to how those island and West Indian people have in their own right as well. So when we came to America, I just saw that there was a very distinct difference of the way that my parents were treated among other folks. So the good thing is we grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And if any of you are from New York or Brooklyn, you know, like you find your tribe of people and you stick with your tribe of people and they're like little islands within itself. But once we traveled outside of the Caribbean and West Indian parts of Brooklyn, then you saw that my parents were really treated unfairly. And there were two things that had to do with that. One was absolutely the color of the skin that they had, and two was the accents that they carry. My parents have very thick, very heavy West Indian accents. So we're from Trinidad. It's very similar to Jamaican. It has a dialect. It's an English and Southern Island dialect. And so they were treated unfairly, I think, because of those two things. Growing up and seeing that, at the time, you don't know the difference. You think that's really just an American thing. And I think as my sisters and I got older in America and we realized, number one, immigrants aren't just handed things. I think that that's one thing that the American people assume is, well, because you're immigrant, you get all of these systems that support you. Yeah, no, that's not true. Access to healthcare is different. The access of the ability to have livable wage is different. Accents, language, color of your skin, all of that counts against you. So there is some definite distinct racisms when people find out you're an immigrant to this country. So seeing my parents go through that, but continuing to develop what they thought an American dream was, we didn't go after the typical American dream. We went after what we defined as the American dream. And what my parents really wanted for us is to have an ability to live in this country, seek out American education, and have the ability to produce our own lives and to be successful, in which me and my two sisters have done. And so my parents, though they still live in the same 2-bedroom house and they still live modestly, and my mom still, God love her, washes her sandwich bags to reuse them, that's because we grew up poor and we grew up as immigrants. But that is what is instilled in us today. It is my job to make sure that the immigrants behind me build their American dream. Because I was given the opportunity in America to have a very successful career. And also to think about this for a second. I'm sitting on a panel with Tawana Bain, one of the most successful Black women in this community, and Dr. Brogdon, who is nationally known for his craft and education. And I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born here. I wasn't given any type of sustained luxury. So if that's not an accomplishment for me to set for the people behind me, I don't know what is. But every immigrant that comes behind me will have the same opportunities, because that is what's important, that we build our own definition of American dream, that Tawana built her own definition of an American dream, that Dr. Brogdon changes the mindset of the white privilege and has everyone have an American dream. It doesn't mean the same to everybody, but that's what's important to me, is having the allies to be able to do that. Because I still, to this day, my dad, just the other day, didn't get what he needed to at a pharmacy because the person behind the counter couldn't understand what he was saying and said, you know what, I don't have to deal with this. We speak American, we speak English in America. That's the culture I need to change in this country, so the people behind me get treated fairly, because to this day, my parents still aren't treated fairly.
I want to talk about the immigrant thing real quick. And I know we're running up on time. It's amazing how I think I'll never have enough to say, and then I have more than one. I want to use the example.
Passionate, Tawana. It's passion.
Yeah, I want to use the example of my nail tech. whom I think has hung the stars and the moon. She's an amazing mother, wife, daughter, so on and so forth. And one day while getting my nails done, I've noticed that her family called her one name and the customers called her another name. And I remember saying, you know, why do you go by Sarah when you're in here, but then you go by your maiden name, Manette, when your family is referencing you? And she explained to me that to make it easier on Western civilization, when people come to our country, if they screw up our name, rather than correcting them, they either keep the name that we say, this is the way that I can pronounce it, or they're given a whole new name. And I thought to myself, who the hell are we to change the birth name of individuals? Who are we to not be willing to do the work to pronounce, to say their name? Because bet your bottom dollar, I'm not going to any other country where I'm going to allow you to change my name to make you more comfortable because you can't pronounce it. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go from being Tawana to being Aphrodite or Sarah or Becky or whatever name you need to call me because it's more comfortable to you. We need to do better as a country. When we talk about making a person feel they belong, let's start with saying their name.
And
So I just
with
have to
that,
hop off.
yeah,
I was
Keisha
gonna say-
Deonarine,
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
so much for joining us today as one of our
Absolutely.
panelists.
If
See you,
any of
Keisha.
you
Good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Brogdon. Nice seeing you, Tawana. Tawana and I are in Bingham. Tawana, you're in Bingham, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
We are in Bingham this year addressing the racial equity conversation for the city. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. Again, it's been an honor to sit on a panel with Tawana and Dr. Brogdon. Dr. Brogdon, I'm a huge fan of yours, huge fan. If any of you ever want to take a class at Simmons College and learn about the Radical King, the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Brogdon is an expert. White Fragility. So I wrote in the chat, there's some books that would be really great for people to read. White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. Actually, if you have time to hop on at 12 o'clock, she is actually coming to Metro United Way and Park Community Credit Union. We are doing a joint speaker series called Beyond Buzzwords, and she is our guest today, if you all have time to check that out. And also Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Anything from Isabel Wilkinson and Ta-Nehisi Coates are my favorite books to read. So have to hop off, but thank you so much for everyone having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so to our other couple of panelists, to follow up with what Keisha just recommended on the book, that's one of our popular questions over in the Q&A is, what book would you recommend for us to get started on educating ourselves?
Well, let me give you two. One book is called No Innocent Bystander, Becoming an Ally in the Struggle for Justice. It's written by Shannon Crago-Snell and Christopher Dussault. I'll type that information in the chat box. And you also need to get Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, because, you know, the claim I'm not racist is a claim of neutrality. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. You're either supporting the system or you're working to dismantle it. You cannot be neutral. So we even have to shift our language and how we're talking about it. And so Kendi's work is very, very important. So I'll put that in the chat box.
So Keisha gave several that I would have recommended, but I'd like to add The Political Determinants of Health by Daniel Doss. And I'd also highly recommend, we bring on authors. We don't necessarily always recommend books. We like for you to hear from them directly. The weekly digital dialogue series that we do, we bring speakers from all over the country to have tough conversations from everything from economics to housing to business and supply chain. So the weekly digital dialogue series, I put the information about the conference in the chat. Please also check out the website where you can find information on the weekly digital dialogue as well.
And we do have one last question here. And thank you guys for writing that in the chat. And I know since we're also recording this webinar, we'll be able to go back and have that list of books that we can post for people to check out and to take, you know, at least start educating ourselves on, like Louis, you talked about the ethno view of our worldview, be able to shift that perspective a little bit. I know we do have one other question in the Q&A. How do we get minority community involved in a community give back that costs nothing and gives back to all? So it's to me, and I mean, I'm not a panelist, but I know to me is how do we make it important for people to want to get involved. So, you know, my marketing lens is on, but is that kind of what to do with that? Like if there's a community give back, how do you just get everybody involved?
Well, a part of that to me is the responsibility and the burden of community leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm not just talking about people who have like official titles, but people who want to stand up and want to be counted and want to get in the game. Anybody can be a leader in some capacity. And so, you know, it's just willing, you decide you're going to use the influence you have to affect change. And so something that's going to really help to shift the paradigm, and this will be the last thing I'll say, is desegregation really hurt the Black community. And the reason it did was because the white community was not really willing to really integrate society at every level. Basically, what desegregation was taking the best talent out of the Black community and bringing them into white space, and then gutting all our Black institutions and leaving our community completely disenfranchised, which is why by 2053, the Black community will have zero wealth. So we have the same amount of wealth, 2.6%, that we had coming out of slavery. We made no progress. Home ownership rates are at the level of the Great Depression. And so we need more whites who are willing to get into Black space. So if you want to create some change, get out of your own community, get out of your own comfort zones, get out of your own institutions, come into Black and brown spaces, and support Black leadership, support Black and brown initiatives, support Black and brown programs. Don't come in there like, well, I'm gonna run things and this is how we're gonna, no, you come in there and see, how can we make these things that you say are important? We're gonna get behind them, we're gonna make those things happen. And to me, that is a very, very practical thing that can be done, that can start creating change. So get past the 9th Street marker, find some partners in West Louisville, build some relationships. There are people who are doing some outstanding work. They just don't have all the access to resources and to people. And so, you know, sometimes partnerships and relationships can create change.
All right. Well, I want to take a minute and say thank you to Lewis, to Tawana, to Keisha, and to Christy for their time today. You know, as a chamber, we embarked on this journey of having this discussion a couple of months ago in conversation with Independence Bank. And my ask of you as viewers is to continue this discussion, continue this conversation. Don't let it stop here. We're going to do 5 more in this 6-part series, but I don't want you to just talk about it here. Talk about it in your boardrooms. Talk about it at your kitchen tables. Talk about it in your social settings. This isn't something we can just talk about one time and walk away. We got to keep it going. And I'm going to echo a couple of the books they've already thrown out, you know, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I've read the book. I've been through some studies with it already. I highly encourage that book. It changed my way of thinking. I would like to take a minute and thank again our sponsors, Independence Bank, who was our title sponsor, our supporting sponsor, Leadership Louisville Center, our bronze sponsors, MMN Consulting, LLC, and the Free Code Exchange and Brokers Unlimited, community sponsors, Webster University and Randy Frank Consulting.